Yes, I do have memories. I was 6 when I left, so obviously I have memories, and some of them are stark memories because there was a war on, and Budapest was under siege, and so there was street fighting and so forth. But I don't want to exaggerate because amazingly these experiences were not traumatic. At least I don't feel that they were traumatic. They were traumatic for my mother, of course, but not for me. And also, I mean, it's easy to overestimate my Hungarian roots because I left at an age of 6, and I went with my mother to Vienna, and I grew up in Vienna. These Hungarian roots are much weaker than you might think. Hungarians are amazed if I tell them, but I don't speak it anymore. I can pronounce it, but I can't speak it. And it's a minor detail, with one exception, which is that the historic situation in Hungary and the dramatic situation in which my parents and my mother found itself generated an enormous interest in the history of the Second World War and the background and so forth. So that's the influence, yeah? But it's more an intellectual curiosity than a deep trauma. My roots are actually in Vienna.
Yeah.
Roots, well, I lived there until I was 27, and I did all my schooling, with one short exception, in Hungary, in Vienna, and I did my PhD there. So these are my roots, but they have become weaker since, obviously. I was about 14, 15, and because my father had been an artist, I felt, and my mother encouraged me in that, that I had an artistic talent, and one of my teachers did the same, and so I decided to study architecture, which in retrospect was not the most fortunate choice, because I don't seem to have an enormous talent as an artist, and I was very quickly drawn to the more intellectual side of it. And I did the course, and I did it fairly quickly, but the idea was to get to the PhD as quickly as possible, and so that's what I did. I've done practically no architectural work at all. Yes, I suppose so, although we didn't express it in those terms, but I was much more attracted to the social sciences, and the social science input into architecture was very limited, and that's also the reason why I opted for the planning, because the architecture course at that time was very comprehensive. We had to do everything, like architects in those days used to claim that they were able to do, from interior design to regional planning. Now, we had fairly extensive courses in urban and regional planning, and they attracted me, and I didn't specialize because you had to do everything, yes, but I was attracted to that, and I became, even before graduation, one of the professors there asked me to become his assistant, as it was then called, and I did my PhD as quickly as possible, because the PhD was not the fantastic intellectual experience that I was looking for either. So I decided very quickly that I had to fulfill one of my dreams, was to study abroad. And so as a postdoc with the British Council Scholarship, I went to the University of Southampton to study sociology. So I did a 3-year potted course in sociology on undergraduate level, which didn't give me any particular degree, but it allowed me to orientate myself more in the social sciences, and it was very formative for me. That's really when my education started, I suppose. Well, first of all, the course did include some philosophy, not in any formal sense, but I mean there was philosophy involved. I started reading Popper, who had a great influence on me later on, but the turning point came when my advisor at that time asked me to do a short study on American and British planning theory. Now, he didn't tell me what planning theory was, and there's an easy explanation: nobody knew at the time. So I started reading American literature, which was very rich at that time in comparison to all other literature which there was, including the British, because in America in about 1949, 1950, a social science-based planning course was set up at the University of Chicago. And from there, a lot of social scientists entered the field of urban and regional planning and started writing about it, but as sociologists. And so I read that literature, and I was trying to answer for myself, what is this thing, planning theory? And so I identified a few issues in this area and wrote about it, not on British planning. American planning was complex enough, thank you very much. And that was my intellectual luggage. Also, I very quickly decided, it only took me a few weeks, that I couldn't go back to Austria because the environment was not satisfactory. The intellectual environment and also the political environment up to a point. And so I applied for a temporary junior lecturership at an unknown College of Technology, the Oxford College of Technology, and got it because I was the only PhD that they had. And there I was, teaching planning with no practice under my belt, some American planning theory, and an interest in planning history. And it was really at the Oxford College of Technology, which is now called Oxford Brookes University, and has exploded. It's really a very good school. There I developed my ideas about planning theory further, and I was extremely lucky because right opposite was Pergamon Press, and Pergamon Press had decided to publish a urban and regional planning series. And they asked for advice from my head of department, and my head of department asked me to join him, writing about what a planning series at the end of the 1960s should be about. And on this basis, I was invited to join the editorial board of Pergamon Press of that particular series, met very influential people there on the board. I mean, I was a very junior person, but I met really a number of leading professors there. And at some stage they said, well, we also want a book on planning theory. So I wrote a book on planning theory based on the reading and my lecture courses, which I had developed in the meantime. And that hit a raw nerve because it offered an answer, albeit a very controversial answer, to what planning theory could and should be.
And what was so controversial about it?
Well, I decided, on the basis of my reading of the literature, I decided that there was a distinction, and it's not entirely original, I mean, but I spelled it out, that there was a substantive theory of planning and a procedural theory of planning. Substantive meaning, well, there are theories about urban form, about the effect of designing neighborhoods, positive or negative, the effect of having a green belt, or in Dutch terms, a green heart. Now, that's substantive, yes. And the other type of theory, which interested me more, and I was challenged for that, was about what is the planning process like? What sort of mechanisms or procedures need to be followed in order to arrive at a plan that is defensible, that is acceptable. And that's what I wrote about. Now this was challenged, first of all, by traditional architects, planners who had invested in investigating urban form, and I never denied that that was an important part of the planning curriculum, but I simply said procedures are more general, they are more generally applicable than urban form and other substantive theory, because that differs very much from issue to issue, from country to country, from level to level. But what also unexpectedly, when the book came out, 1973, neo-Marxism had hit planning. And so I was challenged because my theories were not neo-Marxist. I mean, I didn't explain the laws of capitalism and how they affected planning, mostly in a negative sense. And so I was criticized from left, right, and center for that, but that gave me some notoriety. I mean, I became a kind of bête noire. And also the additional thing which that book did was it drew the attention of an appointment board here at Delft, University of Technology. And since I had applied for that job after 5 years in the UK, they interviewed me and they appointed me at a very tender age of 34, which I was very pleased and flabbergasted and excited, and I rolled my sleeves up and learned Dutch together with my wife, and we came to the Netherlands. So that's why I'm saying I was extremely lucky. Well, to the extent that it is still being quoted, every PhD feels under an obligation to say that Faludi is a procedural planning theorist, a positivist, and what have you, and dismisses it. I mean, there are some people who are more considerate, but it's a thing of the past. But it's something that people, even without knowing me and knowing my further work, very often refer to. Sure. No, because of the whole intellectual climate in the 1970s, and because of the controversies that I described just now. I mean, I had the same reactions in Amsterdam. Again, a lot of people, the staff at Amsterdam, were geographers or people who were focusing on substance, yes? And not just a few were interested, like I was, in the planning process, and that was a challenge. I mean, they had to cope with me, and so yes, I can fully understand. But I have left this more or less behind. Yes, I mean, the controversy I have left behind. There were various follow-ups. I was trying to redefine and reassert what I was trying to do until about the middle of the 1980s, and for various reasons I stopped doing that. I'm not part of the very alive planning theory community just now. I mean, there's a journal called Planning Theory. I'm on the editorial board, but I mean, I'm not publishing there because I've moved to do other things. Yes. We have a particularly warm feeling for Delft, for the center of Delft. I mean, this is an interesting question of identity. Yes, I mean, obviously, yes, we have Dutch citizenship, and but what's your feeling? Yes. Now, I've read recently that it's typical for immigrants to develop, if they are long-standing immigrants, that they develop a very warm feeling for the immediate environment. And that's what we feel. I mean, I speak for myself, but I think it's the same for my wife. In terms of nationality, I'm a little bit, how shall I say, vague about it, but that has something to do also with my current work on European spatial planning and the role of nationality in this work. But once again, very warm feelings for Delft. Talking about one is, I mean, when I had finished with planning theory, I hadn't done any empirical work on planning theory, yes? Case studies and the like. And I had read about them, but not done any myself. And even before coming, I hit upon the opportunity to organize a year-long multi-annual comparative study between, as it then eventually turned out, Leiden and Oxford. And for various reasons, I decided to study the most routine planning processes that you could imagine, like the issue of a building permit, the decision to build a block of flats, and so forth. And we did this with a team of former colleagues at Oxford, and some staff that I had brought along to Delft. And this was most revealing. First of all, it was my first experience of confronting planning theory, my theoretical assumptions, with practice, and secondly, it was very revealing about Dutch planning. Dutch planning at that time had an enormous reputation. But what we discovered was that the actual processes on the ground were most confused and irregular, if you want. And there are lots of anecdotes that I could tell. And I started discussing this with colleagues, and it turned out that two things turned out. First of all, those who knew practice, including the practitioners themselves, they invariably said to me, "Oh, that's what we do all the time." But then I said, "Look, this is against even against the law what you are doing." Yes? And rather than complaining about their misbehavior, which I thought their adaptations to practice and to the exigencies of practice were perfectly reasonable. So I started questioning the spirit of the law. Now, what's the spirit of the law? It is that plans are there to be observed. What's called a bestemmingsplan, a land use regulation must be implemented. There's no discretionary element built into this. And I said, why don't you change the law and change the philosophy behind the law? But that's a crux. The philosophy behind the law is deeply rooted in the Dutch psyche. Different from the British. I mean, that's what we discovered. And so that was a big thing. We discussed this a lot, and it also caused me to engage in more theoretical reflection, methodological reflection, I called it, about planning. Now, the second point is I then turned my attention to national planning. In the Netherlands, what was then called the Rijksplanologische Dienst did, and found to my amazement that it worked. Hey, there's a national planning system which works. Let me qualify. Again, it doesn't work because plans are being observed very closely. No, but the National Spatial Planning Agency had set out certain ground rules, and in particular it had created a frame, what political scientists call a frame, for looking at the Netherlands and for acting in relationship to the Netherlands, and that's basically the Greenhart-Randstad concept. And right, to my mind, right up till the end of the 20th century, this worked, and there are still reverberations of this in current planning. So I studied that, again, with the help of a lot of empirical research on planning processes, PhDs who helped me. And one of them, Arnold van der Valk, and I published a book. And that's the book we are referring to, Rule and Order, Dutch Planning Doctrine in the 20th Century. Now, again, controversial. Dutch planners don't want to be labeled doctrinal. We are not doctrinal, we are flexible. But that's up to a point, it's misunderstanding what we said about doctrine. And but I think it got a certain amount of recognition. At least I notice now that the term doctrine is used more often than it used to be at that time. Now, just to continue the story, I mean, when I finished the book, and that was in 93, 94, and the book came out in 94, the Dutch planners, a handful of Dutch planners, were at the National Planning Agency, were very interested, and for good reasons, in European planning. And they made a great contribution to European planning. And I started getting interested in that. And that became my passion ever since, for the past 20 years. Yes. And I must admit that I do not follow Dutch discussions anymore, because I'm so focused on European planning that it would be impossible to do both. Well, yes, sure. Yeah, there is the famous story of the finger in the dike. Yes, yeah. The boy that held his finger in the dike, and so forth. That is undoubtedly an element, and it explains some of the specific features of the institutionalization of planning, and in particular land policy in the Netherlands, and the role also of planning in relationship to expropriation, or what the Americans call eminent domain. I think, and this is a common story, I mean, also foreigners looking from the outside, they observe the same thing. Yes? There is an additional element which I think I have added to this, and which is the role of what I call the planning community. Because the story of the finger in the dike doesn't explain why Dutch national planning, emerged at the time when it did emerge, which is roughly 1950s. In order to explain that, you have to really follow the development of the Dutch planning profession and the role of key individuals who formulated this doctrine, very often for reasons of bureaucratic politics. You really have to look at bureaucratic politics too, and find out what the position of this small national planning agency has been, with whom they had to contend, and with whom they liaised, and so forth. And I find this is also a compelling story of how the planning community created Dutch planning doctrine and succeeded for a while, for decades actually, to socialize politicians and the public into believing in this doctrine, because Randstad and Greenhardt have both been creations of the planners. No, well, not exactly, but Randstad has actually been created as a term by, apparently the story goes, by the director of KLM, who had seen the Randstad from the top. But I mean, planners have taken it over, and the Greenhardt, I know, is a creation of a director of the National Planning Agency. So that's the compelling story, to my mind, behind Dutch doctrine. So there's more than just Dutch culture. There is the Dutch planning profession articulating what Dutch culture is about or might be about. wrote a paper once in 1996 on precisely this. The title of the paper was European Planning Doctrine, a Bridge Too Far, ? And I expressed doubts about whether anything like a European planning doctrine of the kind of Dutch doctrine could be articulated. Mind you, that was when we were still talking about the Europe of 12. And now we are into Europe of 28. What I did for the first years was actually to pursue the story of a planning document that was drawn up, not technically speaking by the European Commission, but by representatives of national planners in the Europe of 12 and later 15, called the European Spatial Development Perspective. So I did a very detailed, together with somebody else, study of how this thing had happened, because it's an amazing thing. It lasted between 7 to 10 years, depending on when you say it started, until it was eventually published in 1999. And I learned to know a lot of the people involved from national planning offices. And I began to discover the European processes, how they actually work. And this is not really an EU thing. It's something that is done by the planners of the member states, but always related to the EU. And the big question underlying was, should planning become an EU competence or not? That was a big thing. And here you immediately hit upon a problem that is with us now. I mean, talking about the banking union, talking about the euro, everything. What is the role of the EU in relationship to the role of the member states? And the tremendous ambiguity, also in the position of planners, national planners, yes? So I mean, the most fascinating thing about this was not the outcome, which one might discuss, and which on the one hand is very weak, but on the other hand it set the agenda again for years to come. But the processes. So my old fascination with processes came back again, but it was certainly not a rational process. It was a process full of surprises and political infighting, and you learn a lot about national cultures, actually. No.
An integrated European planning.
Yeah, I always say to students when I talk about this, don't expect a planning office in Brussels. Yes? There are a handful of people at the Directorate General for what's now called Regional and Urban Policy, which deals with the structural funds. And there's this handful of people who, at occasions, were interested in this, and who originally firmly believed that the European Commission should have a hand in this. I interviewed one of the commissioners after she left office, and the characteristic thing was she came from a country, Germany, which was not keen on EU planning at all. But she, having been on the inside and on the receiving end of the ambiguities of the member states, we were asking her about why this process had taken as long as it had taken. And she said, well, if they had given it to us, it would have been much faster. Yeah? Which is probably true, yeah? Although it would have been different. So there's this impatience on part of the people in Brussels, those who were or sometimes still are involved in these discussions, with the endless idiosyncrasies coming out of this intergovernmental process. At the same time, the intergovernmental process creates consensus to the extent that consensus is possible. So I find great parallels here with what I hear about the Council of Ministers, what I hear about the European Council, and so forth. That's right, yes, yeah. The blue banana, yes. I need to say a little bit about the blue banana, what it is actually. It comes out of a French study done in 1989, and it was actually intended to demonstrate to the French public and the French planners that France was in danger. Because if you look at the blue banana, it straddles French territory. But it doesn't include Paris, not in the original conception. And that was at a time, of course, when the Iron Curtain had fallen, and France was expecting to become marginalized. And as far as the west coast, the western provinces of France, the Atlantic coast are concerned, that is a traditional fear, and so this would be enforced in the Bretagne, for instance. Yeah? So that was the blue banana. And it was later on by others redefined as, well, as the core of Europe. And not only that, it was actually designed as such, but it was reconceptualized as a metropolitan core of high-density development and so on, which it is not. The blue banana is actually a polycentric urban network. That's what it is. Yes? Anyhow, it became all related to cohesion policy and to the ethos of the EU of spreading development, of promoting the what's called in technical terms least favored regions. Yes? And so the banana, which they reformulated in some other way, the banana was the area where the money shouldn't go. And the outlying areas, the periphery, that's where the money should go, very crudely speaking. And this then became entangled with a whole discussion about how to promote the competitiveness of Europe. Where there are two positions. One is if you want to promote the competitiveness of Europe, you invest where competitiveness is the highest. That means in the metropolitan areas. And the other one is, yes, but there is also equity, and anyhow, if we can mobilize the dormant potential of the periphery, that too contributes to competitiveness. So that's the discussion, and in the ESDP, European Special Development Perspective, that was nicely articulated. That it doesn't pay much attention to the core of Europe, but it identifies the desirability of promoting the growth of global economic competition zones, I think. I forgot the name now. It's for global economic. They are not competition zones, but there is a definition there, and that articulates this particular conflict and the resolution. So that's the story of the banana, and it was recast as the Pentagon, and that's another story again, because it. Maybe I'll expand on this because it illustrates what happens in European negotiations. Yes? During the last phase, when this Pentagon concept was introduced, the lead partner was Germany. Now, Germany innocently said this is and this is a German word, Städtefünfeck. And because it's defined by London, Milan, Munich, Hamburg, and Paris. So five major areas, and in between that's 20% of the territory inside, with 40% of the population and 50% of the GDP. So that's a handsome figure. It's also sometimes called the 20-40-50 Pentagon. Now, how did Pentagon enter into this? Well, the translator, he simply took the word Städtefünfeck and said in English, that's the Pentagon, which is perfectly correct. But the Pentagon has a different meaning. It's Pentagon with a capital P is, of course, the Ministry of Defense in Washington. And the French translator was much more savvy. He said, no Pentagon, not in the French language. So he called it Le Cœur de l'Europe, the heart of Europe, which is also a good translation. But first of all, it illustrates languages and language difficulties in Europe, of which there are umpteen. I mean, and secondly, it illustrates the underlying meaning of words, which can be very, very different in different languages. At the same time, the word Pentagon is so strong that it's now even used in French, under inverted commas with the lower P. It also says something about planning. If you can create an important symbol, an amusing and informative story. Because I mean, all these planners that sat down together, they were talking Euro-English, which is a separate language these days, yes? And they think they understand each other, but and probably through the interaction, they begin to understand each other, but there are limits there. Yeah? Mm. It's, well, explaining is of course central, yes? And first of all, let me specify, I mean, I'm not doing any teaching in the Netherlands anymore because I'm at a research institute. But yes, I do teaching at the moment in Sweden and in Vienna. These are the two places where I teach. And it allows me to re-articulate the message. It keeps me sharp, yes? And because I find that during teaching you sometimes find better formulations. I very often start lecturing on an article that I'm in the process of writing, and then the article gets changed. So that's the thing, and also my way of teaching, I hope, has sort of changed. I mean, I used to really stand up and give lectures. I started, because I started lecturing in English, which is not my mother tongue. I started reading out the lecture, and now I do it very differently. And yes, I get the best rapport with students, of course, in small groups, and that is satisfying. I'm not sure how good I am in social contact. Probably not very good. Absolutely, yes. And sometimes, you know, something comes to your mind on the spot. Yes, I don't have notes anymore. Yeah? All I have is a PowerPoint presentation with very, very few keywords on it, and I find that every time that I reconstruct the argument, that's basically what you do. Yes, it allows you to respond to the audience, to respond to the local situation. And you hit upon new formulations, yes? And also old ones, of course. I mean, the story of the Pentagon I tell every time. But yes, that's very invigorating. I hope the students feel the same way. But, well done. That's the first one. I wasn't aware of the 400th anniversary, of course, but I always felt that I was, of course, close to the professors of planning there, starting with G.J. van den Berg, who was a kind of mentor to me when I was a very young professor. And then I knew Henk Vogt very well, tragic, but I knew him very well, and I always admired him, how he, and I think this is also University of Groningen, defined himself as a Groningen man, yes, as responsible for Groningen and independent of the Randstad, independent of the metropolitan universities, and setting up his own networks, because very early on he started developing his own international network on evaluation, obviously, because that was his field. And I applaud this. I mean, I very much see Groningen, and I think this is also the spirit of the city as a metropolitan city of the north, and that's one thing. And I see that Geert de Roo pursues the same line differently, but he is president of ESOP now, and has his own contacts and develops them, and so Groningen keeps itself apart from Randstad, and therefore there cannot be any domination by the metropolitan universities, because the two are they play in different